Well, I grew up in what they call the Rogers Park area, the north side of Chicago, a few blocks from Lake Michigan. So I lived in an area where I was a block, 2 blocks from my grammar school and a block from my high school. So for my first 8 years, or 9 years with kindergarten, I went to walk to my grammar school and had a lot of friends. We went through many years, and then we moved to a high school next door, and I was there for another 2 years with the same friends. And then my mother and dad decided to build a small home in Evanston, Illinois. And I think it was the end of my sophomore year, they moved, and I spent my next 2 years at a school called Evanston Township High School in Evanston, Illinois, which is really one of the great high schools in the Midwest. Along with New Trier, those are the two great, public high schools in the area. And I was very fortunate. It was really an academically, what's the word? Academically challenging school. And in fact, I had some teachers there that were equal to many college professors, motivated, excited, really focused on the students. And they really prepared me to go to college. I can't imagine my college career without my 2 years at Evanston Township High School. Chicago public schools were much better at that time than they are now, but they weren't anywhere near with Evanston Township High School.
Would you say you were a pretty outgoing kid? Like, did you make friends easily? Because I can imagine, jumping around high school to high school, sometimes it's hard at that age to have to like make new friends and kind of get acclimated and meet new people. Were you someone that came easy to, or were you more like a reserved?
No, I was pretty shy kid, and I was not good at sports. I had a back condition even from a young age, which I really couldn't be very athletic, so I never could catch up. I think I was about 12 or 13, and I had to have a body cast put on for about 3 months during the summer or something. And from then on, I was never energetic enough to be a good athlete. And so my mother was a school teacher, and I loved reading. And early on, she took me to public libraries. And as I grew older, I'd go to the libraries myself and get books I enjoyed about explorers and about American frontiersmen and Navy heroes. I read all the Captain Hornblower stories and David Farragut and John Paul Jones and all the leaders and heroes of the early days. And it gave me a very adventurous personality, I think, underneath a relatively shy young man. I had a very bad speech impediment until I was like, I don't know, sophomore in high school. I couldn't differentiate between my R's and my L's. And my mother she took me to several different clinics. She finally found a doctor and a voice in Evanston who taught me how to speak correctly. But I would say if I was talking to a friend named Larry, I would say Rary. I had a very lazy tongue. And so kids would laugh at me, and I was kind of embarrassed and shy in class. So I didn't want to speak up too much because I had a funny way of talking.
It's interesting, Gordon, how a lot of the letters in Crate and Barrel are R's and L's. So right. I guess it made its way to your business eventually, huh?
Right, but it ended up to be, something I had to overcome and something that was challenging. And when I graduated Evanston Township High School, I decided to apply to different schools. In those days, you didn't have a Common App. So you had to, do a nice application of schools. And I applied to Northwestern, which is also in Evanston, applied to the Wharton School of Business in Philadelphia, and I applied to Harvard. And I didn't get accepted at Northwestern. We don't know why, but somehow I had pretty good grades, but maybe they didn't want too many local kids on the campus. So I had a choice between Harvard and Penn. And Harvard, in your freshman year, you had to take language. And I had taken 2 years of Spanish at Evanston Township and really disliked languages. I wasn't very good at English grammar, any of that. So I decided I hate languages. So I decided to go to the Wharton School of Business, which was and still is rated as one of the better business schools. So I went out to Philadelphia. I remember with a trunk, got off at the 32nd Street station, went to uh, the campus, and it was very different then. It was much smaller physical campus than Penn is today. It was a kind of dingy neighborhood. I really didn't enjoy it. I didn't have a very interesting roommate. I didn't make very many friends. And my first year, I found the business school kind of boring and not very motivating. I did well, very well in my grades and classes. And after 9 months there, I decided to apply to Northwestern as a transfer student, and I got in. And I came back to Northwestern for my sophomore, junior, and senior years. And now for 35 years, I've been a trustee there and very involved, chairing several committees, one of them Properties and Buildings Committee. And I've been very involved in the architecture and design and redevelopment of a good part of the campus, both in Evanston and in Chicago.
What was your motivation for studying business at the time? Like, what did you think you would do after college?
I had an uncle one uncle of all my uncles was a very successful businessman. And my dad he ran a small restaurant, and I was very interested in the restaurant business, but he was an old fashioned, businessman. He had immigrated from Palestine, met my mother in New York, and when she was on a visit there, and he moved to Chicago, but eventually he adopted a small restaurant that my mother's oldest brother was retiring from, and so it was a small family restaurant. And guess who worked on busy days and weekends? And I was taught the restaurant business. Mm-hmm. And I did every job from being a busboy to being a waiter to being a steam table cook to being at the salad bar, and many, many, many times washing dishes and being I ran a small catering business, and I did a lot of the catering work as a young man. Mm-hmm. And I thought I wanted to go. I was very motivated. I loved the restaurant business, as it turned out. I decided I was going to go into restaurant business when I graduated college. But at Northwestern, in my sophomore, junior, and senior years, I was actually in what was then called the School of Commerce, the business school. It's now called the Kellogg School. But I found business classes kind of boring, and I love classes in history and political science and European studies, and I got very fascinated by history and the world and governments and travel, and so I was always very motivated to explore. And like I said from early on, I wanted to be an explorer like Daniel Boone or some of the. When I'm thinking back, I haven't talked about this for ages, but then I think about early motivation. That was maybe some of it. So when I graduated my senior year, I was graduating, and it was a friend of mine who was still at the University of Illinois, but we decided that maybe both of us go to Europe for 2 months and travel throughout Europe, rent a car, drive around France and Italy, and maybe we took a flight over to Israel. We came back. We went up through Bologna, Venice, then into Austria, Munich, Frankfurt, ended up in Amsterdam, and then flew over to Copenhagen, and then back to Great Britain, London, and then eventually home over about 2 months. And we had a little Dushavot, a little Renault that we rented, dropped it off in Amsterdam. But ironically, we were visiting, stores that sold pots and pans, and we'd eat for $2 a day, and then we'd go to a fancy French restaurant or an interesting Italian restaurant. Europe was very cheap in those days. This was 1960, and you could live on $5, $6, $7, $10 a day pretty well.
Gordon, I'm curious, during this trip, what did you learn most about yourself?
Well, my great interest was about the food industry and the interest in serving and dining. Remember, I thought I was going to, be a restaurateur for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. I love serving customers, and restaurant business is fun because a customer comes in, they're kind of tired, kind of hungry, not in a great mood. And if you serve them right and you serve great food or wine, or you sit them down, and at the end of an hour and a half, 2 hours, they walk out there a happy person. And I loved making people happy. It was kind of a inbred thing, I guess. My dad was great at that. And that was sort of the beginning. And I was fascinated by Europe. And while in Copenhagen, we lived in the new SAS hotel, I remember. I don't know how we afforded it, but it was near the end of the trip, and we have a few dollars left, I guess. And a block away was a store, a big store called Den Permanente. It was a government-run exhibition hall for the arts and crafts of Denmark. And we walked in there, and my mother loved pottery and loved tea and whatever. I saw some little teapots and a big teapot that were made out of brown stoneware by an artist called Herman Taylor. And I bought them take them home for my mother. And I still have them on the shelves in our home in the library. And they would be a product, if they were in production, that I would buy today. They were beautiful, natural stoneware, brown clay that was just beautifully shaped and molded, sitting two of the little teapots and a little tea pedestals, pig trays. Where did I get that? And in fact, probably 6 months before, my mother her health was deteriorating, and my girlfriend at that time, my not wife now, our senior year in college, we wanted to buy our teapot. So we went to Marshall Field and Company, which was the big department store in Chicago, and went to their China section, and they had about a 30-yard wall of dinnerwares and accessories along one whole wall, very simply displayed. But in each dinnerware pattern had a teapot. And we went up and down the row, and I stopped and I chose a teapot, which was the Artsburg 1382 design. It's roly-poly, sort of like an English round Betty teapot. And I said, she'd love this. It's warm. It's, well-designed, whatever. I didn't know that particular design by Artsburg, a German porcelain factory, would be in our collections of Crate and Barrel for 20 years, and we still sell the teapot 60 years later. And it became the famous. When I retired, they took one of those teapots and plated it in gold for me.
Yeah. What was the state of the furniture industry, or just the home furnishing, home goods industry at that time? Because we always hear about how, travel has opened the eyes of so many entrepreneurs who have come back and created incredible businesses from things that they saw overseas. So I'm just curious, at home, you mentioned this one store, but was it just like smaller boutique shops here and there that you would go through?
There was a few contemporary stores in America, Beignets in New York. There was the regional Bazaar Francais, which was a very tiny but absolutely store filled in New York, full of every French cooking utensil or every cooking utensil you can think of. Maybe it was a 20-foot wide store and from maybe 80 feet deep. And I remember you almost had to walk narrowly through the aisles, but we found so many good things we couldn't find in Chicago there. And we were my wife and I had gotten married. We were in the Caribbean when we were in the Virgin Islands, which, used to be a Danish colony. And near the seaport, there was a Danish store, a little Scandinavian store run by this Danish fellow. And we had gotten married a couple of weeks prior, and we were on our honeymoon. And this was 1961, June of 61. And as we're walking through the store, Carol picks up this stainless steel flatware, turns it over, and says 1808, made in Denmark. And Carol turns to the merchant and says, "How can you have Danish stainless steel for $2.95 a place setting when dansk, Danish flatware is $28.95 a place setting?" He says, "Oh, I go to Denmark and I buy from small stores and up from small resources there. Once in a while, there's a salesman that comes around, sells me different European products, and I buy it direct from small factories." Now, that's a very important thing to remember. And we ended up seeing some teak boards that we bought, and we ended up buying some, the stainless flatware. And then we went on to New York, and we saw some wonderful stores there, like say Bazaar Francais, the original warehouse store, which was a dirty, filthy warehouse called the Pottery Barn, where there's stacks of dinnerware on dusty shelves and everything. Not the Pottery Barn you think of today. It was 3 generations, 3 different owners since. But 4 different owners actually. And the things that we bought, because our wedding gifts were kind of limited, were things we personally could choose, and they were inexpensive, so we could afford it with some of our wedding money. And we came back home, and I went and, I had, gone to New York to be in the restaurant business in 1960. I was at the Four Seasons, New York. It just opened a year before. This was very ultra luxury restaurant on Park Avenue. And I worked there for about 4 or 5 months as a quote unquote management trainee, but they were paying me $65 a week. And you can't live in Manhattan for $65 a week. Couldn't afford the train to get to the suburbs. Anyway, that didn't last. I ran out of money, came back and went into, I opened a small real estate office with a friend I knew, and in very near to the Old Town area, where we ended up opening a store eventually. But for a year I did that. And but when we came back from this trip to the Caribbean and then New York, a lot of our dinnerware and flatware that we bought at these stores came into our small apartment. And we started using it and entertaining friends and living our life. And, Carol was teaching a school and I was, in the real estate business, but we were both a little bit bored. Out February of 62, one night I was washing some of these dishes. I remember they were Artsburg seconds, actually, that we had bought in New York. And that's a very plain white dinnerware. It's kind of beautiful still today. Mm-hmm. And I said, Carol, there got to be other young couples like us with good taste and no money. Why don't we open a store? She turned to me and said, oh, no, come on. I said, no, Carol, let's investigate it. Let's look into it. I'm not thrilled by real estate. You're not happy with teaching school. We're way too creative and energetic to be doing those things.
Gordon, you're at this point 21 or 22, and I assume your wife was around that same age too?
We were 21, 22. Just 22. Turned 22.
What gave you the confidence that, you could begin and start this store? Or, did you just not know? Were you just ignorant to the fact that, you guys can do this and you're young and energetic and frankly don't have much to lose?
Well, that was basically it. We had no money. We had about $10,000 that we saved from wedding gifts, or little savings from the work we both did. And in fact, we thought we needed $20,000 to open a store. And we couldn't raise $10,000. You could have bought half interest in this idea for $10,000. And I was turned down by some wealthy people I knew, and I did a little real estate work for it. I said, no, don't, and my father finally gave us all the cash he had, about $7,000. So we opened the Crate and Barrel with about $17,000 of capital.
And what didn't those people you were going to for money like about the idea at the time? What were they telling you?
Well, the two young kids who had no experience. Like one guy said to me, Gordon, you're very good. You're very, creative. I was working as a real estate broker, trying to bring him land. He was a home builder and a multimillionaire back in 60. And George said to me, Gordon, if you don't do well, I'm not going to be very happy with you. And if you do well, you're going to be very unhappy to make this deal with me. So why don't you raise the money from family or something else? So that's what I did. And we figured we'll get by with $17,000. And then we were lucky. I went to the trade commissioners for Denmark and Sweden and Belgium and France. And in those days, they used to have catalogs of all their manufacturers in these countries. And each of the manufacturers were divided into certain categories like dinnerware, glassware, cookware, whatever. And you can, I worked with trade commissioners here, and we decided, okay, let's create a company. I created something called Euromarket Designs Incorporated. That's the parent of the company, and a name that sounded like we were an importer. And we just wrote letters for their catalogs and price lists, and we started going through these catalogs and ordering by mail, basically, and said, well, ship us, 12 of these and 24 of these and 48 of these, and we knew nothing. Nothing.
What was your strategy, though? I mean, besides, you were applying your own creative touch to sourcing the inventory. Was it also like you were trying to undercut the competition price-wise? It was going to be much more affordable.
The idea was to open a very simple store. We didn't realize how simple it would be. It was just we finally found in August an old elevator, a dumbwaiter factory that they were building a new facility, and they were going to be out in September or something. They weren't out till about November, but mid-November. And it was, it was just on this area called Well Street, Old Town. Wasn't really much of a street. There were some antique dealers, a few interesting little restaurants opened, and another couple gift stores on this 2-block stretch of Well Street, just south of North Avenue. And we decided we could made a deal with the owners of the building, which were the owners of the shop. I'd pay them $350 a month for 3-year lease. And so we had figured out that, with my dad's accountant, that, if we did $100,000 of sales and took out $100 a week to live on, $5,000 a year, we could probably end up with a $5,000 profit. But, and pay for everything slowly. So we didn't get into this thing till late. We found a young man who sort of semi-construction oriented guy, and we figured out this when these guys emptied out all their equipment and everything, it was like an old factory. And the walls were all bashed up. There was grease and dirt on everything. And so we figured out the cheapest way of doing it. So we went out and bought crating lumber and just put up vertical strips of crating lumber along the walls to cover up, up to about 9 feet, and above it we painted. And then we got 2 big sanders, and for 3 days and nights we sanded the hell out of the floors, getting down almost to the wood. They hung just big globe lanterns, and this was about a 1,700-foot store. It had a basement, and it had a vacant lot just to the side, and we had a side door, and trucks could pull up into that vacant lot, unload crates, and we used to have a tire there, and they take out the tire, drop the wooden crate on the tire, and then we roll it onto the gravel and into the store. And so we have all these crates, and my wife came out, why don't we put these crates as display fixtures? And we found another guy who sold crates in Chicago. And so we also found a guy who sold wooden barrels. So we started deciding that, okay, the display, we didn't have any plans. This was a month before we opened. So we got these wooden crates that came in from Europe, some big wooden barrels that British pottery used to sell us sip in. And my wife said, let's set them up. And we figured out aisles and how to do it. She put burlap on the top of them. And then the merchandise started coming in. And we thought people would call us. They'd organize. All of a sudden, a truck would pull up or a ship would arrive, and we had to pay for it. And we didn't know how to price it. We didn't know how to do anything. I mean, not a thing. We didn't know retail from at all.
Gordon, how are you guys marketing, even just your existence?
We weren't. There was no marketing in the first 9 months. There was no marketing. We just opened up on Well Street. And as it turned out, we opened on December 7th, 1962.
Yeah.
After working day and night for about 3 weeks building this place. But we were, 23 years old. We were both very hardworking, and we had this one guy. And one of my dad's ex-employees was our first employee as a stock guy. So there were 3 of us. And then this guy who was helping us build the store, who ended up working a little part-time on Sundays for us. And we opened the store. We didn't know what to call it. About 3 weeks before we opened, with the crates and barrels in the store, not put together yet, but just there, a friend of an acquaintance of ours who had been in the marketing business, or was in the marketing business, stopped by and, oh, what are you guys doing? How's it going? Heard you want to open a store. And she looked around and said, what are you going to call the store? Carol says, we don't have a name yet. We've come up with all sorts of names and we can't agree. And as it ended up, she looked at Carol and said, why don't you call it the Barrel and Crate? And Carol came down, was working in the basement, unpacking merchandise from crates and, doing some paperwork. And Carol came down and said, oh, this lady, our friend that we met once, a mutual friend, thinks we should call it Barrel and Crate. And Carol says, but you know what, Gordon, I think it sounds better, Crate and Barrel. I said, good idea. Let's do it. Well, we had to get just a little hand-painted sign before we opened the store. We had about 3 weeks to go. So that became the name, the Crate and Barrel. And on the side of the building, we had a painter paint a barrel. This was about a 20-foot sign, a big barrel, and our name, sort of diagonally across the barrel. and then just the wooden letters across the storefront of this space. So we opened on December 7th of 62. They used to call the Christmas Walk in Old Town, where we had a lot of antique stores and little boutique stores and a few boutique stores. And the people would come down on this weekend and everybody's selling Christmas items. And we had a few things that we had bought, but mostly it was just our china and glass and woodenware and flatware and glassware. And we were open on the 7th of December, 62. And by the end of the month, I came to, I said, Carol, I can't believe this. We did $8,000 in these, 23 days. I said, 8 times 12 is 96. Not being Jewish, I never knew there was a Christmas gift thing. I never got a Christmas gift in my life.
Yeah.
So I thought December was just the prelude to January, February, March, April. And January 63 came and we did $4,000. And then February of 63 was one of the snowiest years I ever could remember. We did $2,000. Now we were really scared, thought this continues, we're going to go out of business.
Yeah.
But then a month or two later, the city warmed up, the snow melted, people started coming out for the restaurants and the cute stores. And all of a sudden it became popular to come down to the Second City opened a block to the north of us, a little block and a half to the north of us. And it became a little better known for a nice place and fun place to go for a hamburger, a Spanish restaurant that was there. And there were 2 or 3 restaurants, and it was sort of an offbeat place. We were a couple blocks from the Gold Coast to the west, and sort of people didn't before that go to that area. They were worried about what it was like. It was more antique district, a few antique stores, and so unless you were the kind of explorer, you sort of didn't do that. And but all of a sudden on Friday nights, Saturdays, Sundays, it became much more popular.
Mm-hmm.
And then, by the end, we got better and better month by month. And by the end of the year, we had done about $96,000, not far from where we had to be.
Gordon, what were customers or even just regular patrons that were walking in, what were they saying about Crate and Barrel? Because I know you said earlier that, being someone who was passionate about the restaurant service industry, putting a smile on people's faces was something that was, a part of you. It's part of your essence. How did that translate to Crate and Barrel and the folks that were walking in there?
Well, Carol and I were both very enthusiastic, very knowledgeable about all the products we bought, why we bought them, how we bought them. This was stoneware, this was a porcelain, it's not earthenware. This is hand-blown glass, not machine-made glass. And we were very good at selling. And we just convinced everybody about, the quality, was certainly much better than the prices we were charging. I mean, literally for the first month or two, we didn't even know how to mark up the product properly. So we're selling a lot of it at cost. But after that, we learned how to, we took a keystone markup, and that was very unusual. And we were probably 20 to 30 to 40% less expensive than Marshall Fields or Carson Peary Scott or Peacocks or the dominant home, tabletop and, cookware stores in the city.
It's crazy how they didn't teach you guys how to mark things up in business school, right?
We didn't know. We didn't have invoices on some stuff early enough.
Yeah, I graduated business school in 2014, and they didn't teach me that stuff either. So nothing's changed.
So we just learned as we went, and like I say, we made a little profit the first year, first month, and a little profit the second year, and we went from 100,000 to 200,000 to 350,000, and then this guy who owned the building, this one of the owners who was in the dumbwaiter factory business, said, "You know what? You guys are just lucky with this location. I'm going to. My girlfriend and I'd like to open a candy store here, and we can make more money than the rent you're paying us." But I knew they owned 50 feet of vacant. They had some ownership in a vacant lot just 25 feet to the south of us. And I believe it or not, during the summers, couple summers, I had worked in a law firm where my brother-in-law was, and they did a lot of real estate work. And I was doing research on real estate to find in the late 20s and early 30s, a lot of people went bankrupt, or a lot of people had vacant lots in the suburbs that they had been sold, like land in Florida or something, and were told how valuable it would be. And then it was unsaleable for many years, and people forgot about it. They didn't pay their taxes and whatever, and it was a whole business. I did this for one summer of searching for heirs, getting a majority of the heirs to sign a quitclaim deed, filing a quitclaim, filing these deeds, filing a partition suit, and making good title to the property. And the landowners, whoever owned the equity, these people, had to redeem it within 24 months. You had 2 years once you were given notice to redeem it. And if you didn't redeem, the guy who bought the back taxes made good title. And the back taxes were often less than the value in the 60s of the property. Well, guess what? These guys had a quitclaim interest in this land. They knew possibly of a few of the owners. And I had to go out and find all the other owners. And I made a deal. I said, look, you're going to lose this property. A guy had already bought the taxes and was certainly ready to foreclose. And I said, if I make good title, otherwise you're going to lose the property. I know what I'm doing. I'll make good title to this property for you. You'll pay me for all this taxes and everything. I said, but if I do, I want you to put the property down as equity, and I'll build a building on it. And I'll have 10 years. And we agreed on a rent. And so 1965, that's what happened. We built a new building so he could have his candy store with his girlfriend. And we built the first Crate and Barrel, which had really nice wood walls, beautiful oak flooring, a balcony mezzanine, beautiful wood beams and wood ceilings. And that happened in 1965. And by then, our business had grown to 400,000. The next year went to 500,000, then to almost 600,000. And then 1968, and the Democratic Convention and the rioting in Chicago happened. They were burning, Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. And all of a sudden, the city became a lot scarier place to live and have a store. And, a guy had approached me to open a store in the suburbs up in Wilmette called Plaza del Lago. And after that there was one time there was rioting 2 blocks or 3 blocks from, they were burning stores down on Division Street, 3 blocks from where we were. And Carol and I said, you know what, let's diversify. Let's open a second store. So that's how we got started. We went from one store where I was running it every day, and Carol was there most every day until our son was born in 65. And we built a store in Wilmette, a north suburb of Chicago. We moved up there, bought a small home, and that's how Crate and Barrel got to its second store, the rioting in 1967, 68.
Gordon, were you and Carol still going to Europe and directly bringing products back, or were there others doing that work for you at this point?
Well, the real trick was we went to Europe and we walked all the streets in Copenhagen and Paris and met Potter and we went to the trade show, the Frankfurt Fair, the Hanover Fair, the Birmingham Fair, and we'd meet vendors. We'd see the product. Our taste and style was just, fitted what we wanted to sell. And we'd see a booth and we'd walk in and introduce ourselves and, negotiate prices and buy product. That's, they had trade fairs all over Europe, and we'd go there and meet vendors. So we met some retailers, and they told us of different guys to go visit. And we met one said, go down to Valerie, down in the south of France. And there's a great potter named Gerard Hoffman. It took us, at the end of one of the trade fairs or after a trip to Paris, we went down to Valerie and met this guy, and he made a beautiful red clayware. It was just beautiful, burnt on the bottom, beautiful dark red. You never saw anything like it. And we took 2 days to convince him to sell to us, because their experience in most small potteries and glass makers and everything else in Europe was Americans would come over, place one big order, and they'd never see them again. We said, no. We understand. We'll place orders and replace orders. And if the product sells, I guarantee you we'll be back here buying again and again. We developed a wonderful potter in Holland called Herman Zaalberg, we've met wonderful glass factories. We met a guy who could be a Swedish agent. He introduced us to wonderful glass factories in southern Sweden, like Hovmantorp and Björkshult and Gulletsgrove. And at that time, there were maybe 20 glass factories in the south of Sweden. I think there's one or two now left, Costa Boda and Orfors. But in those days, in the 60s, there were, you still had a lot of small potteries and glass factories, and they employed 30, 40, 50 people. Eventually, Europe, handmade products in Europe became too expensive. But we developed these relationships. We met a great friend in Denmark who had a wonderful store in a wholesale business called Torben Orskov. And he gave us a lot of relationship connections where they bought from. And he introduced us to Mary Mekko up in Finland. And he made beautiful products for us in plastics and ceramics. And he made beautiful leather bags in Poland in those days. And we just relished these relationships, developed these relationships, and we're still friends with his widow.
Yeah.
I mean,
Gordon, I'm curious, where did, so, kind of going back, you were this guy who was very interested in the restaurant business. You went and studied, you got a business degree. You thought you were going to be in hospitality. You ended up doing this, but clearly you had this creativity or this like taste for, nice products, like nice aesthetic, furniture or home goods or things like this. Where did that come from? Was that something that you just always had in you, or did you have to develop that over time?
We probably had a little of it. The fact that I bought a teapot set in Denmark in 1960, the fact that I bought a beautiful teapot for my mother.
Yeah.
And my sister was very artistic. She became a very good interior decorator. She's 4 years older. And she became a contemporary interior designer in the North Shore of Chicago. And my mother took us to the Art Institute, introduced us to culture in Chicago a bit. But God only knows, Carol, my sister Barbara, and I don't know where we got it.
Mm.
And we just had an interest, and we, looked at all the design and style magazines, and we looked at architecture. We loved architecture. We loved, contemporary architecture. We loved contemporary furniture. Knoll was the big furniture brand in those days. Florence Knoll was doing some beautiful contemporary things, and Herman Miller. And we couldn't afford that kind of product. But,
yeah.
We looked for product that was clean, contemporary. We sold one piece of furniture in those days, a Norwegian table that folded down, a teak table. Bought a few things, but we weren't in the furniture business till many years later.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's sort of how it got started. So it was just building relationships with factories, small factories in Europe. And so we were making glass for maybe 8-9 years in Sweden, and it got too expensive. Then we moved a lot of production to Eastern France, and we were doing there for about 5-6 years. And then they were getting too expensive as wages went up, as the dollar got, the European currencies, the franc and the Deutschmark got, went up in value. And then we, found a factory in Poland. We started traveling to Poland to buy Polish hand-blown glass, which was, just they can make it, if we worked hard at it, they can make it almost as nice as the French and the Swedes. So we kept, and then we went to Czechoslovakia and bought, early on, for many years, we were the biggest buyer of hand-blown Polish glassware in America. And
Gordon, in the mid-'80s, Crate & Barrel grew to about 17 locations, and then a decade after, in the mid-'90s, you guys were probably closer to 60 locations, which obviously meant that things were going well and something was going right, and people actually wanted what you were giving them and buying the products that you guys sold. Beyond, I guess, just those general things that I said, what do you think led to the ultimate success and obviously now current success of Crate & Barrel?
Well, first of all, we worked very hard at keeping our stores beautifully designed, the physical buildings or stores. And we worked very hard at visual display, and we trained the original store designers. Carol was obviously the first one who was very good at this. And, she worked very hard at training the first 1 or 2 designers. And then those guys trained other people. And as we opened the store, we not only had a store manager and an assistant, of course, we always had a store designer. And we used to laugh and we used to say, look, it takes 5 years to make a store manager neurotic enough to run a Crate and Barrel. And it takes 3 years to make a person neurotic enough to be a Crate and Barrel store designer. And we had very talented, we were hiring probably a lot of gay men at that time, way before people were employing them. And they were very good with customers, very good with visual display. They were just so enjoyable to work with, so much in love with what our mission was. And listen, I told our people, listen, we're in this as a mission. Hopefully we'll be successful. But our mission was to bring good style, good taste, and good design to American households. And if you believe in this mission, join us. And if you don't believe it, if it's just a job, eventually you're not going to like it, and we're not going to like you. So let us know before we let you know whether you fit in or not. And we very carefully edited our staff. We very much got leadership that was very motivated and very devoted. And I got to tell you, when we ran one store, it was all perfection. Our second store was still perfection. Our third store, our fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. I mean, we kept training and developing people who loved what we were doing, loved the way we managed the company, loved working for us and our subordinate managers. And, we promoted from within. So the only times we ever hired outsiders was when we needed a financial person as an accountant, when we needed an architect, where we needed specially trained people. But if when we got into technology, we had to hire a technology person from outside. But our loyalty to our staff was the same loyalty we got back from our staff. And people worked 20, 30 years for Crate and Barrel, and they still are many people there who we started with years ago or, have been there 20, 30 years. The company's now in its 60th year this year.
Yeah, that's incredible. As the leader of the company, as the company was growing, and you were hiring more people and having to manage more people, was that a struggle for you, or did it come naturally to be?
No, it came naturally, and I was a very good speaker and motivator, and I could, explain to people why we work so hard at this. Retail's hard. The long hours, hard work, not often, but once in a while, difficult customers. And it's easy to let a store go. And nobody in our industry kept their stores as pristine, as beautifully displayed as we did. And people just enjoyed coming into the stores. I mean, people say, I just love being here. It's so beautiful and whatever. I just, I get so many good ideas. And slowly but surely, we built up a clientele.
Gordon, how was it like, and I guess, until recently, how was it like working with, your wife, right? Your life partner, but also your business partner? Because a lot of times now you'll see, a boyfriend, girlfriend, or a husband, wife, wife launching a business, and something suffers, right? Either the business suffers or the relationship suffers. How are you able to maintain both at such a successful level?
Well, first of all, the first 3 years from 62 to 65, we worked together. We had to work together. We worked well. We enjoyed it. Then we had our first child in 65, 57 years ago almost. And Carol stepped back for about a year. And then in 68, we opened our second store, and she came back and worked there. And she would always work at Christmas, when the busy season was there. And then we had our second and third child. And then she was really, wanted to, be home more and would come in maybe in busy holiday days or something like that. But she wasn't coming back full time. When the kids grew older, 14, 15, and were in high school or something, then she, wanted to come back and get more involved in a business. But we then said, well, wait a minute, we got too many people who are now in leadership who've worked for us for 10 years or 8 years. And we're doing a great job. How does the wife come in? And my wife's got strong feelings and a strong way of, expressing them. And she's terrific. And so we decided she decided, what, I'm going to open a great food store, which we don't have here in the North Shore of Chicago. I'm going to open a store that's going to sell wonderful, unique cheeses and wonderful olive oils and wonderful fresh foods, prepared foods. And I'm going to create a store. And she rented a 2,500 square foot store in a small town called Glencoe, Illinois, and opened foodstuffs in the early 80s. I think it was the early 80s. Yeah, maybe 82, 83, and built this great business. We called it Foodstuffs. And we had our Tom Shortledge, our advertising guy who did our packaging and everything, who was an employee. He was a part-time employee. He was an assistant art director at Young and Rubicam, and he worked part-time at Crate and Barrel. And he really understood what we should look like and our stories that we got to tell in our catalogs and our advertising. And he was an incredible talent. He eventually became a head designer in Chicago, head creative guy in Chicago for Young and Rubicam. But his whole idea and our whole idea was everything, the packaging, the name. He came up with the name Foodstuffs. We kept playing around with different names and wonderful packaging, just like Crate and Barrel. But he did our wraparound black and white Helvetica around our bags, around our boxes. He did sketches. Our first ads were just hand sketches with a little story about what we were doing. That went on for 2, 3, 4 years. And then we started being able to afford a photographer to shoot a picture of a product. But the small ads we ran were fun to watch. They were very creative. And they ran in the local magazine. They ran a little bit in the newspaper at Christmas time or whatever. We just went very carefully, very slowly. We did everything ourselves, literally, with a few key people. And we had some very creative store designers who took what Carol taught them, and we grew, got better at building fixtures, got better at visual display. We got much better at lighting. We got much better at signage. Everything that makes a store interesting, we did better than anybody else.
Yeah.
And people just loved doing it. And we had, like I say, many, many people worked 2 decades at Crate and Barrel. That's unheard of in retail.
Yeah.
And I'm saying they stayed as designers, they stayed as secretaries, they stayed as, managers. So we were fun to work with. We were very fair. We were very open with them. And they could be very proud of what they were doing. And, if you motivate young people with a good business idea, like we were providing good taste to the American public, and not very many Americans had sophisticated good taste, so they were happy to have a store that did it for them.
Right.
Like people did it, like Mickey Dexter did with the Gap, with apparel and whatever. Yeah. You just put it together. Richard Lieberskin did it with Ann Taylor, and in those days, these were fresh stores, and you were competing with department stores, which tried to do everything and didn't do anything really well.
Right.
So listen, and we ran scared for 20 years. It wasn't until 1975 we took the big gamble of opening up our first store on Michigan Avenue, across from Water Tower Place. It was on Chestnut, Michigan. And we heard about this place available, and we negotiated a rent that was very scary for us. And when we opened that, it ended up being a success. And then the whole city could see us, not on Wells Street, but they could see us on Michigan Avenue. And once that store had its first year or 2 or 3 of success, we at that time called that 76, 77. We knew we could take a deep breath. But that was our 5th store. Stores 1, 2, 3, 4. Every store we opened, we were worried about whether the companies could survive.
And throughout all those years, I mean, so much changed, right? Like you had this whole, you had malls come, and you had malls everywhere and department stores. And then obviously in the 90s, late 90s, the internet comes around and e-commerce, and you have websites. And right. I'm curious what that kind of experience was like for Crate and Barrel at that time. You're 40-year-old company almost at the time, and you've dominated sort of this retail experience, and then now this internet is coming along, and you're having to, I'm sure, have a presence there too. What was that situation like?
Well, first we had to get better in the catalog business, and we started doing better and better catalogs and developing fulfillment centers and things like that. And then in 1997, 90, I had one real big setback in 96, late 96. I had a guy in charge of logistics, and he had a guy in technology, and we had to develop a new warehouse fulfillment system. And maybe this was 95 or something. And we developed a whole new pick and pull systems, a new put away systems, and everything else. And I wasn't paying much attention. And all of a sudden, we installed this new system without testing it at first. And he was assuring me everything would work, and nothing worked. We lost total control of our warehouse inventory, what was going on, how to pull stuff. So we literally had a team by then of maybe 6 or 8 merchants with assistants who had all been promoted up from the stores. So they saw how to, maybe there was 10 of them, and they knew what the stores needed. And we literally made out orders for each store every week by literally counting by hand everything that was in the warehouse in each category. So there were 10 buyers, 10 teams of buyers. And literally we had to get by estimating inventory and shipping what we thought each store needed, trying to count the inventory. It took us 9 months to get out of that thing. And another company I knew, another contemporary furniture store, had happened the same thing, had gone bankrupt. It scared the hell out of me because I didn't know technology. I didn't know logistics and warehousing. And I realized we were getting bigger. And so I got very, very worried about, having all my eggs, all of our eggs. We were the sole shareholder. Everything we owned was in the company. And I got very worried about, if I could blow the whole thing. And maybe then we were, I don't know, $250 to $300 million company. And I should step back a minute and say, what year was it? 1971, we got a call from an older couple who were merchants in Harvard Square. They owned a little store called the Upper Story, and the husband had a stroke, and the wife called me up and said, "Oh my God, Harry and I got to sell the business. We like you, we've met you. You come out and see if you want to buy it. We don't know who to sell it to, who's going to keep it as a nice store." So I went out there with one of my store managers. We looked at the store. We looked at their warehouse. They had a little store, maybe 3,800 square feet, half of which was tabletop, upper end tabletop, and the other half was furniture. And we weren't in the furniture business at Crate. We had little oak tables, side tables. We had a flap table. We had maybe 4, 5, 6 items in what I'd call light furniture. And this was a store with sofas and chairs and dining tables, and it was a serious furniture store. And we went back and forth that day. And while we were in the lawyer's office, a fire starts in the warehouse or building next to their warehouse. And I remember I got in a cab and dashed over there, and the fireman had put out the fire with just a little smoke damage. And we went back to the lawyer's office, and we were going back and forth, myself and one of my old-time managers, and should we buy it? Should we not buy it? And she was selling it to me for the inventory. It was very inexpensive. I don't know, $65,000 or $75,000. And finally, I decided to buy it. And that was when the Crate and Barrel bought a store called the Upper Story in Cambridge. Well, the Upper Story got into was in the furniture business. And we ran this small store. We had a second floor that was empty. We took that over and built a stairway. Eventually, we built into the basement. We went from a 3,600 square foot store till eventually a slightly bigger store. We got to 8,500, 9,000 square feet. And the person I had first put in charge was a brother-in-law who I adored as a social, brother-in-law. But when I got into running the business, he operated like a tyrant. Mm-hmm. At first, I asked him to buy the business from us because we had such different operating styles. I mean, I was very much part of the team and working with him. He was much an autocrat. It was getting worse and worse. And eventually, I had to ask him to leave, and I bought out his contract for a year and whatever. And then I put one of my founding store designers, who was very talented. This was 1979. And I put him in with with one of our clerical guys in our warehouse. I said, and we sat and talked about conceptually what kind of furniture store it should become. And a blend of contemporary with maybe some Scandinavian antique things that would add a little warmth to the idea. And so that's how we started. And we were doing about $500,000. And the second year did $1 million. Its third year, $1.5 million. And eventually, the store by 1987, 88 was doing about $9 million, about $1,000 a square foot in that store. And wasn't Harvard Square, it was Putnam Square. It was about a block up from Widener Library, the Harvard Library. And people were just, loved our taste, loved our style. But what was important was the same familiar, knowledgeable, friendly staff. And we did fun advertising. And we, just built that business to be one of the real competitive furniture stores in Boston. And for years, though, my staff was trying to convince me that we should, as this success succeeded, that we should bring furniture to Chicago. I said, but our guys are we're casual tabletop and houseware stores. We're not a furniture store. It's different staffing. It's different planning. It's different, manufacturers. Everything's different. And it would change who we were. And we went through a lot of agonizing for 4 or 5 years. And finally, we decided to make that decision. And we brought this idea to Chicago. We opened the first one. We took our Plaza del Lago, our second store, took over the whole building. We only part of it, and built that was the summer of '89. And then in December, we, was it 90? Yeah, in September of 90, we opened a store in Michigan Avenue. We built a new building there on Michigan Avenue. We were leaving. We were actually told our lease would be up, and we had to build a new building. And that's when I built this glass and white metal building on Michigan Avenue. And then the year following, we opened in Oak Brook and took over a much bigger space and opened furniture and housewares. And believe it or not, we got very, very good at this, putting the two together, the gift tabletop housewares kitchen business, along with a serious furniture business, but very contemporary, very nice. But the same spirit, the same idea, clean design, well-made product. Mostly furniture was mostly domestic manufacturing, made in New England, made in North Carolina, whatever. And we built, with these two young men doing the buying and training others, we started building the furniture business. And then we had to convert all of our houseware stores, which were 8, 9, 10,000 square feet, to build these bigger home stores, we call them. And these stores were 20, 24,000, 30,000 square feet. New York, when it built it on Madison and 59th, I think was even close to, with the stock rooms, it was close to 38,000 square feet. So we built this and all of a sudden our business started really booming and growing. But then I told you about this warehouse, this computer breakdown, and scared the hell out of me because we didn't know if we could survive that. And then I started thinking, do I want to have all my eggs in one basket? And at that time, I said, why don't I look around and maybe I can find a financial partner, or maybe I should go public, or maybe I should do this. And I decided I didn't want to go public because I didn't want to be driven by market analysts telling me how I should run my business and criticizing this and that, whatever. And, then should I get private investors? And I figured out our biggest weaknesses. We weren't really strong in direct marketing. That Williams-Sonoma had almost half their business in catalogs and half their business in stores. And we had 5 or 6% of our business in catalog and 95% of our business in retail stores. So we traveled, I found a wonderful, actually grandson of J.P. Morgan, who was an elderly investment banker, but ran his own little boutique. I hired John Morgan, and we traveled the world for a year talking to everybody we could meet who might be a good partner. And finally, we ended up connecting with the Otto Group in Germany, in Hamburg, Germany. They were, at that time, they probably still are, the biggest direct marketing company in Europe. They had catalogs not only in Germany, 3 or 4 brands. They were in Switzerland. They were in England. They were in France. They were in Eastern Europe. And they ran these different countries with the same technology, but obviously different printed catalogs and whatever. They were by far the biggest catalog company in the world until Amazon came along. But anyway, there was no Amazon in those days. And we made we found them to be very affable, very interested. We negotiated a fair price, not a real high price, but, we were more interested in the type of partner. And the long term, we kept about 32% of the company and sold them 68%. And the relationship worked out terrific. They taught us how to be much better in the catalog business, how to invest in the catalog business, how to, do the numbers and statistics, all the things I really never cared about. They taught us everything we needed to know. I taught my people what they needed to know. And we were starting to build a catalog business. And then when we started doing, and when one day, about a year into our partnership, must have been 1999. I remember we had a meeting. They said, "You guys should start looking into the internet." I said, "What's the internet?" They explained it to me. I said, "No, come on. No, you should look into the internet business." Well, as you
Gordon, just to interrupt you real quick regarding the internet and the internet business that you're about to go into. When had you first started hearing rumblings of the internet, and what was your initial reaction to it when in connection to your business?
Well, that was it. The first rumblings was they're saying, "We're starting to invest in it and look into it and build it. You guys should start doing it." And they also owned Eddie Bauer at that time, and they were pushing Eddie Bauer to get into it. And so we started looking into it. And I put my son Chris Segal in charge of it. He was in the company at that time, and had been in the company for about a decade. And he started taking over the internet, and he developed a website, and he developed the product for it, or chose the product for it. And we started improving our fulfillment center, and we had a very good logistics fulfillment guy working for us. And by a year later, we had our website out, and we were in the web business, in the internet business. And, our direct marketing business went, let's say we started in 99. By the time I retired in 2008, the internet business was, what was it? It was about 15%, 16% of our turnover from about our whole direct marketing catalog and internet was about 15, 16%.
That's a pretty high number for 2008. Like even today, or even up to before the pandemic, e-commerce numbers were right around 15-20% of any retailer's average retailer's business. So,
and we were,
you guys were way ahead of it.
That's what we were in. We were in about the 16%, I think, by that time. And so we're doing pretty well in it, and building fulfillment centers in New Jersey and California. And, we have then had 3 distribution centers that could ship to the, markets in each region. And so we were going right along. I could tell you that the catalog business during COVID, the internet business during COVID, was about 70% of our turnover.
Right.
And today it's still, I think, 55% of the turnover, 55, 60%. So when I retired in 2008, the Crate and Barrel was, it's 3 times bigger now than when I retired. And if we hadn't had the internet, I don't know how we would have survived COVID. Probably could have, just because our parent, it's a big capital base and, committed to the company. But they were terrific partners. We'd have 2 board meetings a year, one in Chicago and one in Hamburg. And they were very supportive, never had a fight, never had any big disagreements. The only thing that was sad is that they have a rule in Germany: when you're 60, you got to retire. Everybody in their company. They let me go to 70, but at 70, I had to step down as CEO. I stayed on as a consultant for a number of years, but couldn't run it. So my number 2 lady, who ran the merchandise and been with me for 35 years, 38 years, she took over, Barbara Turf, but she was only 4 years younger. So 4 years later, she had to retire. So I retired in 2008. She retired in 2012. And then they hired they had put some other people. We didn't do a good job of succession planning. Barbara was, wanted to control too much, and she didn't like competitors coming in. She didn't realize that someday she had to retire. This lady was smart, charming, wonderful, great merchant. People loved to work for her. Vendors loved to sell to her. It's funny, Howard Schultz, the founder of Starbucks, and, we signed our store on Michigan Avenue. Crate and Barrel didn't want to renew the lease a number of years ago, and we were figuring out who could be a tenant. We were out in Aspen at part of the Aspen Institute. They were having a benefit for Howard Schultz and his wife because of their great charitable giving. Howard Schultz, before he started Starbucks, was selling a Swedish housewares line called Hammerplast. And I knew Howard from those days. And we were at this event in Aspen, and I had my two oldest grandsons with me. And my wife said, as we're at this, when the speech is over, why don't you go up and introduce Andrew and Jonathan to Howard? Which I said, great idea. And just as I was getting up from the table when the speakers were over and everything, my wife gives me an elbow and she says, mention that Crate and Barrel will be leaving the Michigan Avenue building in 2 years, year and a half in those days. And so I went up and the crowd cleared eventually, and I introduced Howard to my two grandsons. And he said, oh, it's so great you're here, Gordon, and whatever. Thank God we haven't seen each other in years and whatever. And so just as I finished, I said, Howard, you're building these new big roasteries, and we hear you're opening in different cities. I said, the Crate and Barrel building would be great on Michigan Avenue. He looks at me straight in the eye. Gordon, let's make a deal. It took about another year to make the deal, but I don't know if you've been in Chicago, but this beautiful building is now done with a beautiful roastery inside.
That's amazing.
It's lines outside all the time.
I've got to check that out next time.
Unless it's a blizzard, the store is always filled. And they roast coffee there. They show everybody how they got these big roasters and how they take the coffee and they shoot it over to the different areas. How they got six different ways to grind it, 7 different ways to brew it. And, it's really wonderful. It's much better than the New York one, much better than the one in Seattle. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's of the 6 in the world. I think there's Shanghai, Tokyo, Seattle, Chicago, New York, and Milan. This is by far the most successful. Always a line there, always filled.
Yeah. So, Gordon, I'm curious, having built this incredibly successful company and had this, just generally successful life, right? We talk about how you're still married, that hadn't had much of an effect from that standpoint on your personal life and all this stuff. What is something that, if you could boil it down to like a very big learning that you have realized over the years having done all this? And it could be business related, it could be life related. I'm generally speaking like life wise. What would you say it is? Like, what is something that you've picked up along the way that you can maybe share with people listening that they might not realize just yet?
Well, to build a business, my grandson's dating a wonderful young lady, and she's studying for a doctorate at the University of Chicago. He's studying law at Northwestern. We had this debate the other day at our house up in the country and about capitalism. And he's a little bit to the left of Karl Marx, but anyway, wonderful lady, and that's where you should be, that's wonderful.
Aren't they all these days? Aren't they all?
I love her dearly, but I was explaining how hard you got to work to build something, to build a company. And, I worked, to the detriment somewhat of my family. I never played golf. I played a little tennis on weekends because it was an hour, not 4 or 5 hours. I worked 6 days a week. At night, after dinner and reading to the kids or something, I'd go to my desk and I'd do paperwork, import paperwork, pricing paperwork. I mean, I literally would work 10 hours a day in the business, another couple hours at night, 5 days a week, and work in the stores the 6th day. So it takes an enormous amount of energy, commitment, and probably more important, you got to have a personality that relishes other people and creating an emotional attachment to the business. And that's what we did. I mean, people worked for us for much less money than they could have made elsewhere because they loved what we were doing. And we had this mission. How do we bring tasteful, good design to American homes? And, if you look at European homes, they're very tasteful. They don't have as much in them, but they're usually smaller. But everything is very tasteful, very well selected, very well done. And we were the editors of the home. We brought tasteful, good design product to the home, whether it was a glass or a dinnerware set or, a simple garlic press, or whether you were buying a beautiful table and chairs or a beautiful sofa. We were bringing beautiful product at fair pricing, not cheap, but not expensive. It's always easy to find beautiful things that are expensive. It's hard to find beautiful things that are affordable. And I used to say to my people, just remember, you're the consumer's buying agent. You're not the factory's selling agent. And a lot of buyers get caught up in relationships with certain favorite factories and don't negotiate hard for the best price. And they forget who they're working for, their customer. And we said, look, if you're a buyer of Crate and Barrel, you got to be very nice to our vendors. You got to be very honest, very open. And you got to never place an order and then cancel it and stick them with the inventory. We were always the nicest store group to shop in Europe or in America. Vendors loved us. They loved doing business with us. They loved our people. They'd bring us platters of food when they came in at Christmas time from New York. And, they'd go to Zabar's and bring a whole lunch for the whole staff, just about, buying staff. And they just loved doing business with us because not that we were easy pushovers, but they thought we were honest. They thought we were hardworking, and we imbued them with the mission. And they started to understand what kind of product, what kind of quality, that we had to have to build this business. And those relationships, we had great relationships with our furniture vendors, with our glass factories, as we went to Asia, we developed great relationships that we were only in Asia the last decade or so. We were mostly, the first 40, 50 is mostly Europe. But obviously as Asia became more capable, we were always a little bit in Japan, and that grew because they make beautiful ceramic ware. But then we got to Indonesia, where they did beautiful teak furniture, and we got to Malaysia, we got to Vietnam. Eventually, well, we were first in Thailand making wonderful wood, and then then we went to China. I and couple other people. We were the first retailers in Guangdong province. We were at the Canton in 1975. Mao was still alive. He didn't die till 78. We went into China from Hong Kong, myself and another friend who owned a store, and an agent that we knew from San Francisco, a lady who had access. And we got government access, but not as Crate and Barrel. We were as Euro Market Designs. We were an importer, is how we presented ourselves. And we went to China in those early days. We spent a week at the Canton Fair in 75. It was such a backward place, and poverty was so bad. There were a few taxi cabs. It took us a day to go from Hong Kong to Canton. Now it takes you an hour. It was a whole day. You had to take the bridge up through the Northern Territories, carry your bags across a bridge, go through a detention center for 4 hours, get on a train for 2 hours, get off and find a cab and stay in the old Tungfang Hotel. I got to tell you, we didn't drink any water for a week. For breakfast, we'd have orange soda, and for dinner, we'd have beer. And it was such a backward place. Young Chinese kids would run up to when our car came to a stop sign or stoplight. There weren't many stoplights. There weren't many cars. It was, come to a stop. Little kids would run up, put their faces against the windows and look at us like, oh my God, look at all these round-eyed people. We were back in the 18th century. It was incredible. And as much as I'm not happy with China today because of their politics and aggressiveness, what the progress that has been made in the last 45, 50 years in China has been incredible, and brought 1 billion people out of absolute backwardness and poverty. So,
Gordon, you've had an incredible story, an incredible journey, and we're so thankful that you're sharing it with us here today. And I know folks can't see you, but you look like you still have great taste and that you're a stylish guy even now. I think I might have seen a peek of your watch. I'm curious as to what watch you're wearing, because I know me and Pat are big watch guys.
This is a watch called 40 FO, and it's $49.
Wow.
It's a watch made, I forgot where it's made. It's made in Japan, I think.
Okay.
And it's got a red band. It comes, there was an ad in the New York Times magazine a couple months ago. It's made in Japan.
Okay.
And it's an encased watch, and the body is plastic. The bands are different colors. And what's more important is that the hands, one's red, one's blue, and one's yellow. The second hand is yellow, and The minutes are red and the hours are blue. And everybody comments about it. And I think the watch costs $49.
I love
Now,
it.
I think they're $59, but it's called 40.
I know. I saw that red band, and I was like, I got to ask him what he's wearing.
Yeah. So I've got expensive watches. I never wear them. Wearing my $49 watch.
Are you a watch collector?
No, I just have, over the years, I've Jensen's designed. George Jensen made beautiful watches, and have some of those, and then some gifts I got over the years. But I'm not a fancy watch guy. I much prefer this $49 watch.
I like it. Well, it's my wife and I. It's funny, you were talking about how you guys started Crate and Barrel for the young couple and folks that really didn't necessarily have much money, but they wanted a good design. And I'll say now, like in our house, a lot of the products that we have are from CB2 and Crate and Barrel. So, and I think a lot of our friends and family are kind of in that same boat. So we love seeing the continued success of the company that you've built. And, as podcasters who are interviewing founders, it's incredible to see brands that have gone on for 60 plus years and the people behind them, like yourself. And it's no surprise to us that when we hear your story, that we can see why Crate and Barrel has been a success. So I hope that those that are listening can take some inspiration and draw inspiration from you and your story and go out and build incredible things out there as well.
Well, what I feel very proud about is we were always very honest and open with our staff and our customers. We expected people to work hard, but we were very loyal. Never fired anyone unless there was absolute incompetence or absolute lack of hard work. You had to work hard. You had to be there on time and, be there responsible for whatever your responsibilities were. But we developed a culture which really had a mission, and the mission was to figure out a way, whether you're buying or running the distribution centers or you're on the sales floor, that you really felt devoted to the customer to bring them this product in the best possible way and get it to them at the best possible price. And right now, there's that Crate and Barrel, after Barbara retired, went through 2 or 3 CEOs that really didn't know what they were doing, didn't have the same cultural thought process, and it was quite difficult. But in the last 2 years, they've brought aboard a wonderful lady who really is reinvigorating the company. And business has been terrific, and the company is healthy and well, and got a good partner, and it's doing well. It's doing well on the internet. It's doing well again in the stores. And it was. I don't know what the last couple months have been with COVID coming back, but after COVID broke, and everybody started getting vaccines, business came back in the stores pretty damn good in the summer and fall of this year and the Christmas season, and the internet business has been terrific. So, for most cases, we're still doing what we started out to do some 60 years ago, and it was such an adventure. It was so much fun. Looking back, or many days you were aggravated, or many days when you were disappointed in something or someone. But for the most part, we had wonderful people. We still, for all the people who have retired or left the company, every year my wife and I sponsor a Life After Crate event at a restaurant near here. And we have a private room, and we gather 100, 120 of executives, and everybody's friends, and everybody sees old coworkers. And obviously, most of them are from the Chicago area, but we have people coming from California, people coming from New York and Boston, and they come from all over the country just to be together with their fellow workers who help build the company. And so we still have these wonderful evening events, and where everybody so excited, where everyone's just doing what's going on with their families. Crate was like one big family. Everybody knew everybody else's personal lives, their husband's issues, or their kids' problems, or literally it was like a family. And people consequently were very loyal to the company and the idea of the company. And we made it that way. We made it so it would feel like it was a very special kind of place to work, and I think that's back in the spirit. And the stores look better than ever. The product is really well edited now. I'm very, very happy with the lady who's now running Crate and Barrel, and we meet every 2-3 months for lunch. And she's very proud of what's going on, and so am I.
Amazing. Well, thanks again, Gordon, for hanging out and sharing this, and looking forward to keeping in touch. And hopefully at some point we can meet in person someday. But this has been incredible. Thank you.
You're welcome, gentlemen. I'm pleased to have done this tonight. We need to keep a record of what happened, and this was a good way of creating history.
Absolutely. That's why we do this.
Thank you, Gordon. Have a great rest of the night.
Thank you very much, guys. Take care.